It is the Beaver Banter Podcast. I'm CJ Baumgartner. Ian Rivers is my co-host. And Ian, another great day to be a Beaver. We are back for episode 2 of season 2. And hopefully by the time that you're listening to this, everybody out there, you can see us on the YouTube page fully. You can see us on Facebook and Twitter and all those other couple places. You can also always find the Beaver Banter Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Ian, we got a lot to talk about. Is a very satisfying, let's say, opening week for Bemidji State athletics.
Yeah, actually, there was some success where we didn't expect it. And I think, as we'll touch on in football, more success than even we as optimists kind of expected. So a very good opening weekend. And we kind of we pick up right where we left off from last sports season, having the softball team kind of carry us through the spring and the men's golf team, of course. But very exciting start so far to 2023.
Yeah, and I mean, you kind of touched on it. Everybody had their moments this weekend, and I think we should first start off with the volleyball team. Now, Ian, we've kind of talked about this off recording. We've talked about this when we've been recording a little bit last week. You know, the volleyball team is someone that a group of people that we didn't give a ton of attention to last year, just with how busy it was with football and women's soccer. But the volleyball team, you know, they've had been kind of down, let's just say, at least since I've known the volleyball program, since I stepped on campus in 2016. It's been just kind of tough to get some traction, tough to get things going. But Ian, they had a pretty good opening week. They had a tournament down in Nashville. How did things go for Bemidji State?
Pretty well, all things considered, I believe. They went 2-2 on the weekend, which to me was a welcome surprise. We won 4 games all of last season. And of course, this is non-conference, it's preseason tournaments. We'll see how things continue as we get into NSIC play later on this season. But 2-2 compared to 4-24 last season, that's a pretty good pace. And honestly, when you're looking at the box scores, so they started off obviously with the number 25 in the country, Lynn University, and they lost that 3-0. They got swept. And I'm thinking, okay, yep, it's more of the same. And then, they go play Alabama Huntsville and they lose that one 3-1 in 4 sets. And so it's a little bit better of a product in that game.
They still let down the hockey faithful, though. I will say.
They did. And then you jump into Saturday and they go 2-0. They sweep Carson Newman 3-0. And then they played a really tough game against Trevecca Nazarene. And I actually got a chance to watch the last 2 sets of that game. And they really played well, especially in that 4th set. They kind of battled from behind. I think they were down 5 points or so midway through that set, and they battled back and they ended up winning it. So that was a good game to watch. And I think it really kind of puts some confidence in me looking forward. And then even when you look at the box score of that Lynn University game, they lost 3-0, but they lost 25-22 in the first set, had a pretty rough second set, only got 13 points. And then they forced a 29-27. Obviously they lost the 3rd set as well, but forced it all the way to 29. That means they were right there at the end of the set and made it competitive and made them work for it. So against the top 25 team, you're at least putting some work in. And then again, more of the same against Alabama Huntsville. They lost the first set by 2, lost the second set, or actually won the second set, and then 20 and 21 points respectively. So even in the box score, when you're looking at that, it doesn't seem like it's that bad of a result, even though you're looking at only winning 1 out of 4 sets and losing all 3 sets. I think it really still looks like a good weekend overall.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. 2-2 is a good spot for this team. And like you said, put up a good effort against the number 25th ranked team in college volleyball, Division II. And really, like you said, playing them tough and just getting a couple wins on the year. And I know it's very hard to gauge non-conference play in any sport. So, how much does that carry over into NSIC play? That kind of remains to be seen. But I think overall, it's just a positive sign for this program to get a couple wins and to try and get things moving in that right direction. And yeah, volleyball got a nice solid start to the year, and we'll see if things can pick up. Ian, I don't have their schedule quite offhand here. I got to pull that up still, but what's kind of the road ahead for them in kind of the next week or two?
So one quick note before we move on to this next weekend's schedule. The team we beat on Saturday evening, Trevecca Nazarene, actually did beat that Lynn University, who was ranked 25th in the
All
nation
right.
earlier that day. So we didn't beat a ranked opponent, but we beat a team who beat a ranked opponent. Now that's kind of using the transitive property that some teams in the
You know
past
what?
have used.
It benefits my narrative, so it applies, Ian.
Exactly, it validates my priors, so I'm going to go ahead and use it.
Yeah.
But if it didn't, it would be a relevant stat. But
Yeah,
absolutely,
exactly. It's just off. Don't even
yes.
use it.
But I truly do. I think that that's a good something to hang your hat on, because they did look like that Trevecca Nazarene looked like a pretty good team when we played against them, at least from what I watched, and the Beavers were still able to rally from behind. So this week they're going from Nashville to Colorado Springs, Colorado. They are playing in the Mountain Lion Classic. 2 games on Friday, 2 games on Saturday, a similar setup. 2 games on Friday against Western Oregon, sorry, and then the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, and then they play St. Martin's and Western Colorado on Saturday. So, again, like CJ kind of said, it's tough to gauge, especially early in the season, some of these non-conference opponents and how good they actually are and how much that's going to mean to you stacking up against them. But I think it's another good opportunity to pick up, 1 or 2 wins. Let's see if we can build on some of that momentum we got last weekend.
Yeah, exactly. And you go out east a little bit, you head on over to Nashville, you go to play in the, like you said, Mountain Lion Classic, which is just a great name for a tournament, going into Colorado Springs and getting to do that. It's kind of the fun part of college sports, and especially in some of these kind of early season tournaments, and other, obviously it's not just the only sport. Like baseball and softball go down south to begin their seasons. Basketball usually takes a road trip somewhere, and it's kind of fun. It's the beginning of the season tournament. You play a lot of games. It's against teams you don't know. You're kind of out of your element a little bit, but there's really that chance to kind of find out a lot about your team because you're playing teams that you're not typically playing. You step out of your comfort zone in that sense before you jump back into the comfort zone of the NSIC schedule. So it'll be really fun to see how Bemidji State goes this weekend and kind of how that propels them into conference play. Still early in the season, but you know what? BSU's got 2 wins in 4 games, and for a volleyball program that's looking to pick up momentum, I'll take it.
Absolutely. Anything counts at this point. Whenever the wins come, you're not going to, even if it's an ugly win, you're going to take it and you're going to run with it. So that's a very good start for women's volleyball.
Yeah, exactly. So let's shift gears here a little bit, Ian, and let's talk about women's soccer. They got their start to the season, a couple of draws. Does that surprise you? Should we be concerned about the women's soccer team? Or is this kind of like last year where it's more of the same, where it's, the offense is taking a little bit to get going, but the defense is still strong as ever?
Well, I think it's a little bit of everything. I wasn't very concerned about it, other than the fact that obviously we had two draws, which draws aren't losses, so that's a good thing. And obviously we only gave up 1 goal in 2 games. That's a pretty good average of a half a goal a game. But we only scored 1 goal, and it wasn't even from the run of play. It was a penalty kick. Now, I did not get an opportunity to watch these games. The MIAA, I believe, is the conference that both of these teams play in, and they don't allow you to watch as freely as the NSIC network will. So you have to pay to use a subscription. I wasn't about to do that, unfortunately, for
No,
just
screw the
the first.
MIAA.
Right. So
Screw them. My homies at the NSIC network, they know what's up. They got us.
they know what's up.
If nobody got me, I know the NSIC network has got me in those situations.
Precisely. So I did not pay for that subscription to watch those 2 games. But I was like, you know what? Sure, they tied 2 games, drew 2 games, whatever. Let's move on with the season. But then I started looking at box scores and some of the recaps, and the first game doesn't alarm me that much. Shots were tied 12-12. BSU had 4 shots on target, and Missouri Western had 3. So, all in all, a pretty even game. 13 fouls to 10. That one didn't concern me as much as the Rockhurst game, where BSU got outshot 14-4 and 3-0 when it comes to shots on target. And that is not something that I think we see this team do all that often. So I'll be interested to see how good Rockhurst is over the course of this season. Their record is 1-0-1 right now, so obviously that's not much to go on so far in the season. But we know BSU is a good program, and they just drew BSU and really looked like they were on the front foot, at least according to the box score. So it's not quite cause for concern yet. Like we said, we kind of overreacted a little bit last season to some early season troubles and, not looking as good as we might have hoped they did. So we got to let the season marinate a little bit. Maybe the offense needs a little bit of time to get, clicking and figure out who that goal scorer is going to be up top. And I'm not too concerned yet, but, as a pessimist for things like this, I always find myself looking at negatives and overreacting to them a little bit too much. That probably comes with growing up in Minnesota and watching sports teams in this state just all my life. It's just like, let's look for the pattern of how it's going to spiral out of control this time and try to get ahead of it.
Let's not forget the Chargers aspect that gets thrown into there too.
Yeah, it's like double. Like it's everything plus the Chargers, who are just the Vikings in the AFC. So it's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. But, I think, like you said, I think we overreacted a little bit last year to their slow start, or maybe I don't know if overreacted is the right word, but it's the right word to use in this situation of I think we maybe just made too big of a deal about, are things going to turn around? Are things going to turn around? There's still a lot of time here before we put any indictments on how the offense is doing. As we learned last year, it took a little bit of time to gel. New team, new, you kind of have to figure out who you are each year. You have to reinvent yourself each year, especially in college sports. So, let's give it another week before we really start to kind of hit the panic meter. I think if there's a 1 to 5 scale on the old panic meter here, I think I'd put it maybe at like a 2, like a not good, but it's certainly not off, but it's certainly not concerning quite yet. But last year they did find their footing. They were able to at least get enough offense to complement a great defense that they had. And I think, as you talked a little bit about, Ian, last season as well with the defense, that's something that they really, really do well. And I think the biggest thing out of the weekend that's encouraging is that at the very least, we know that defense isn't slowing down.
Yeah, that was a very good opening weekend for the Beavers defense. And honestly, the Beavers didn't have some high-flying offense in terms of the top teams in the country, because when you look at the statistics, you see 1.56 goals per game last season, and that's a pretty good number considering they're third in the NSIC, but they won the NSIC tournament. They won it mostly on the back of their defense. They just didn't score a ton of goals. And obviously right now being at 0.5 goals per game is not where you want to be. But again, this is something that, later in the season, if October starts and the team is still struggling, this is definitely a game against Rockhurst, especially, that we'll look back on and say, yeah, maybe we should have taken more from that game and been a little bit more concerned about the offense. But again, if it turns itself around and we course correct and get back on track, it's really probably just going to be another one of those games that we, like the Concordia game last year, where it's like, ooh, that's a draw we weren't expecting to have happen. But at the end of the day, it's just going to take some time to figure out what this game really means, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So, Ian, what is next for BSU women's soccer? What's kind of the schedule look like ahead? And kind of, is there anything that catches your eye for the upcoming schedule for the BSU women's soccer team?
Well, NSIC play. Oh, no, NSIC play does not start. Weirdly enough, we play Upper Iowa, who obviously just left the conference this past off season. So we play a non-conference game against Upper Iowa. Those games will be in Bemidji this coming. It's not your typical Friday, Sunday. It's actually Friday and next Tuesday. So not your typical soccer schedule, but 2 straight home games here for the Beavers. And then we have a non-conference edition of the Beaver Bash. So one of our 4 non-conference opponents will be Minot State this year. And then, of course, we will play them again in mid-October during the conference slate. So 2 more tune-up games before conference play starts. I'm looking to go at least 1-0-1 in these games. Minot State usually just plays the Beavers so tough, man. I mean, I'm pretty sure even the last 2 seasons, maybe in the regular season, we've drawn against Minot State, which I can go verify right now. But Minot's always a team that gives you trouble. But I guess the one thing to look out for is, especially against Upper Iowa, can we figure out the offense? Can we get the offense clicking? We're back at home. How much did that play a factor in it, too? Those games were in St. Joseph, Missouri. That may have had something to do with it. Maybe it was exceedingly hot there this weekend, just like it was here. And that could have played very well into the home team's hands in that instance.
You got to get back to the friendly confines of Chet Anderson Stadium, you know? If you're not used to that breeze off of Lake Bemidji, you're just not ready.
Yeah. We played 2 games against Minot State last year, and it took us 180 minutes plus to score a goal against them. We tied them 0-0 in the second to last game of the regular season. And then, of course, in the NSIC championship game, it was tied 0-0 heading into the second overtime period. And the Beavers ended up scoring 2, the Bemidji State Beavers, that is, to take the win in the NSIC championship. So, again, Minot's always a team. They are pretty good on defense as well. Something about the Beavers and playing good defense, man. There's just something about them. But we'll see. I'm like I said, I'm looking for at least 1-0-1 this weekend, and maybe for the offense to get clicking a little bit more.
There's something about there's a Daniel Tosh stand-up bit where he's talking about soccer, and he's talking about, you ever bet on soccer? And he says, what's the over-under? 0.5? And apparently it feels like the over-under for Bemidji State, Minot State women's soccer this weekend, the over-under might be at 0.5, and people taking the under might not be the worst bet in that situation.
Exactly, especially early in the season. Now it's not a conference game, so maybe you're not as nervous to kind of drop those points. I think that might have been a big thing for both of those teams, especially with only 2 games left in the season last year. And then, as we talked about with playoff soccer of any kind, it's kind of cagey. You're typically playing a little bit more defensively in a tournament like that anyways, because you don't want to make mistakes. But
it's certainly a lot colder.
Yes, it was. So we'll see how the warmer weather and not being a conference game that doesn't affect your standing in the conference. We'll see how that affects the play and the style of play for the 2 Beavers this weekend. But again, yeah, maybe taking the under on the 0.5 is not necessarily a bad call.
All right, Ian, who between the Beaver, let's just pick this non-conference Beaver bash. Who wins 1-0 and why?
Man, I have to say right now, Bemidji State wins 1-0 because they're at home. It's midweek. It's a Tuesday game, so it'll be interrupting the class schedule of all those Minot State players having to come over to Minnesota. And I guess I just got to bank on anything we've seen from the past couple of seasons, and that's that Bemidji State has a slight advantage over Minot State as of right now. If I had to pick one goal in the game, I think I'd give it to BSU.
Yeah, I think I'd have to go that way, and I'm going to go with Chet Anderson Stadium. I'm going to go with that home field advantage. I think that's what puts them over the line. If that game is played in Minot, I'm still picking the Beavers because I'm a homer, but I'm not as confident in that. So, yeah, I'm going to have to go with Bemidji State winning 1-0 in that game. Now, whether it ends in like a penalty kick or whether it ends in like a shootout or some kind, or it's just a straight 1-0, that remains to be seen. But we'll have to find out. Looks to be another good weekend of women's soccer for Bemidji State University as they have their home opener. And it's always fun to try and get those games in at the Chet now, Ian, because as we just mentioned, when it gets cold, you really got to love it to be down there. So for a lot of the casual women's soccer fans, this might be your time to go kind of sneak in and get a game while the weather's warm out.
Yeah, you get your chance to get your foot in the door and say that you are following the team before the playoff run starts, and then you look like just the regular bandwagon student, and then you can be that pretentious guy on campus that's like, yeah, I was actually following them all year. I knew they would get here. So that's always fun. We know that you want to be that person just like I do. So get out and watch those games.
Yeah, it's all you really got to do is just say you watch soccer, and people might already start to think that, but you know what? It's okay because Bemidji State women's soccer has made it cool to follow soccer. Let's just Let's put it that way. Ian, so let's shift gears here a little bit to football. Bemidji State opened the season number 11 in the country. They opened number 7 in, according to one writer for NCAA Division II in his power rankings, one spot behind MSU Mankato. And just looking at Bemidji State's first home game, we talked about Northern State. We talked about, there could be some potential pitfalls, some stumbles, some things that can kind of get in their way. Northern's typically played them pretty tough in recent years, but Ian, I've seen a lot of butt kickings by Bemidji State that they gave to people on opening week. And normally it's against a Southern opponent. Normally it's against a team that you kind of expect. Normally Upper Iowa comes into town and you stomp on them a little bit. This time, though, it was Northern State, and they scored early. They scored often, and the game was over by the end of the first quarter?
I wouldn't say it was over by the end of the first quarter, because for the first 10 minutes of the second quarter is the only time that Northern State held any momentum. It was pretty windy, and the Beavers got the win first. And so they kind of were able to pass the ball a little better down the field, and the kicking game was going a lot better for them, obviously, with the wind at your back. And there was a period of time there for just a second, or for a very brief 10-minute period before BSU turned it back on again at the end of the half, where it really looked a little bit treacherous for the Beavers. But other than that, yeah, the Beavers were in pretty much complete control of this game. What was the final score here? 49-13. So obviously we were pretty low on the offensive end, and even you, who said 42 points, you hit the under on the Beavers score. So a very good game from the Beavers. It was one of those games, though. So last week you asked me if I thought that the Beavers expectations were getting a bit too high, and I said no. And then I rethought, because I'm like, maybe I do have too high of expectations, because it was one of those games where I was like, man, we're playing kind of sloppy. Oh, what is that? What are we doing here? And I look down at the scoreboard and it's like 42-13. And I'm like, man, maybe I'm being a little too hard on them. And so maybe I've just come to expect perfection from this team against anybody other than Mankato and Augustana. But I really do think they played a good balanced game. I guess we both missed on the scores. My bold prediction was that the offense would come out. I just was way too low on the point total that they would put up. And your bold prediction was Brandon Alt would throw for, what did you say, 300 yards and 4 touchdowns?
Yeah.
So he had 3 touchdowns, and he only threw for 176 yards. It really wasn't a passing attack. BSU only threw 25 passes all game, and 4 of them came from backup Sam McGath. So it was a big running attack.
In my defense, Bemidji State was up by so much, they weren't going to sling it around too much in the second half.
Well, that's exactly, we didn't predict that it would be that much of a blowout. So when that happened, it really did kind of affect how much they threw the ball, especially in the second half. And I mean, the running game, that's one thing we need to talk about, man. That was a really good game from the running game. And I think I made a comment, and I said, if BSU can beat you 2 ways on offense, watch out, because this is going to be
over.
It's over, man. Nobody carried the rock more than 10 times in this game, but they had a total of 37 carries for 240 yards rushing. So a pretty good game on the ground. Ali Muhammad probably had the biggest impact on the game. He had 7 carries for 114 yards and 2 touchdowns, including 2 50-plus yard totes. And his first carry on the Bemidji State Beavers was a 53-yard touchdown run. So that was pretty exciting. I did make a tweet that said he was a Northern State transfer, and I immediately kind of thought, he's not a Northern State transfer. And so I looked it up. He's from Minot State. And
he wanted to play for the better Beavers.
Yes, the broadcast guys had said he was a Northern State transfer. And so that just kind of oh, yeah, duh. But yes, he's now on the good Beavers, and he looked really good, man. An average carry of 16.1. Obviously, those long runs can kind of skew that, but he had the burst. He broke away and he stayed away. He didn't get caught from behind, and he made those big runs. And I'm just so excited to have a running game that's worth anything because as we saw Brandon Alt last year, I think he had 15 picks at the end of the season.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's kind of what you get. He had one in this game. I want
They're
to
not
say it
just
was
picks, by the
mostly,
way. They're not great
man, they're
interceptions.
ugly, dude. Brandon, I can't lie to you. They are, most of them are ugly picks. And so this one in this game was again into the wind, so that probably had something to do it. And he was under a lot of pressure. I don't know if he had been hit before releasing the ball or if it was directly after, but that guy was on him. So it was probably something to do with that. But it was about 5 yards underthrown, and so that was a pretty bad one. And that was during the period of the game where I thought Northern was picking up some momentum, but the Beavers were able to withstand that pressure and they ended up coming out with a pretty dominant win.
Yeah, I mean, a really dominant win. I caught bits and pieces of it. I didn't quite watch everything beginning to end, but basically, from what I saw, is like you said, Ian. I mean, Brandon Alt made, outside of the couple wonky passes, I mean, just efficient as can be, and basically, it's just another day at the office for him, ripping apart defenses. He had a great touchdown pass. I don't know if it was his second or his third one to pass of the game. It was to Dell Duncan Busby, who will be kind of the number one target for BSU this year. Beautifully thrown ball. I think and it's probably from like 30 yards out, if I remember right. It was great. So he was dialed in. Like you said, the running game is a game changer. And the thing is with Bolte offenses is they don't like to run one guy. They're very much like, if you imagine the Los Angeles Rams or you imagine any other kind of NFL offense where they don't necessarily have a bell cow back and a backup, they have like three guys that all kind of rotate in. And like you said, Ian, we had, most guy had 10 carries and there were multiple people with that. So, it's kind of, they like to spread that around typically, but like you said, with the new guy that they got in, it just helps out so much to get kind of a guy, because you lose a couple of your top running backs from last year, but now you're able to, and again, that's where the transfer portal comes to help out a team like Bemidji State. You can just plug and play that guy and he's running and you already have a formidable running attack. And it's just going to help Bemidji State through this season. Are they ever going to become a 50-50 pass run team? Not for a second, but especially not with Brandon Alt as your quarterback and not with Bolte as your head coach. But at the same time, can you run enough? There's talking about, can you run enough? Can you pass enough to, can you establish the run enough to help your passing game? And for Bemidji State, it's the other way around. Can you establish the passing game enough to help out your run game? And can your run game basically supplement that? And I think if they can, like we talked about, Ian, it's over for the NSIC, because Bemidji State's just going to run up and down on teams all season long. Just quickly, what did you see on defense for Bemidji State in that game? Again, it's a unit because the offense is so good. We don't quite get to talk about them as much, or there's not necessarily the focus put on them. I mean, overall, in terms of points scored, only gave up 13 points. And if they can do that every game, Bemidji State's going undefeated.
Yeah. It was a really up and down game, I think, from the defense. 13 points doesn't tell the whole story. I mean, when you look at just first downs, Northern State had 16 to BSU's 19. Obviously, that's a bit of a weird one too, because BSU had a lot of like 30+ yard completions and 50+ yard runs for the touchdown and just scoring plays. So that's bound to skew that stat a little bit. I thought the passing defense, actually, hang on. One more thing about Brandon Alt combined with the running game of BSU. Last year, we put the ball in the air so much, and I think you look at that 15 interceptions, and it's an alarming number. But when you throw the ball as much as BSU did, it's bound to end up in the wrong guy's hands at some points. Now, obviously, some of those were still bad interceptions. We would like to get that down around 10, if we could, even 12. But it's just bound to happen. And so if the running game can really establish itself, I think it takes a lot of pressure off Brandon Alt, and it might be a little bit of a down season. You mentioned the 50-50 run split. I mean, we just beat Northern State by 36. We've got easier opponents on the schedule, I assume, than Northern State this year. So just by default, it might kind of be forced into a 50-50 run split just because of how much the Beavers might be leading this year. Obviously, that was week one. Maybe Northern State had a little bit of a Bemidji State issue last year where they're just not ready for the season quite yet. They need to get their feet underneath them. And maybe we were their Mankato from last year. But we'll see how that goes. So that's the only comment I wanted to make about that
Well,
run
yeah,
game.
I mean, it's like a running back, right? Like a running back could have 15 fumbles on the season, but if they have twice as many carries as the guy behind him, of course he's going to have more fumbles because he just has the opportunity to screw up more. But yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that's the one thing about that. And then what was the defense is what we were on. I thought the passing defense was a little bit it was up in the air. They were kind of the bend but don't break variation of the defense because they took the ball away like 4 times. I think they had a total of 4 interceptions. So that's obviously very good. If you can generate turnovers, that's a very good thing. But it's kind of like Trayvon Diggs in 2021 a little bit where he had like 11 interceptions, but he gave up like 1,500 yards receiving that season as well, or what? Maybe it wasn't
Right.
1,500, but you get what I'm saying. They gave up a lot of easy first down completions especially early in the game. Later in the game, you kind of expect it because they're playing off a little bit. They just don't want to get beat deep. But it was the kind of early in the game where it was like, wow, we're kind of letting them march. And then, you let them get inside the red zone and then you make an interception. And so it's like, okay,
Right.
cool. Doesn't matter. But you just let them go 50 yards in 5 plays because they just got 5 straight completions. So that was the only thing that kind of caught my eye. I thought the run defense played really well. One thing I did notice from the secondary is that they were coming up and playing the run extremely aggressively and extremely well. The running backs, even if they were able to bounce off the first tackler in the front 7, they were not getting past that corner or the safety that was already immediately on them as soon as they broke that tackle. So a really good effort from the run defense. So that's a good thing to keep in mind going forward. But ultimately, and I think corner is one of the hardest positions to pick up. So any new players in that position group this year in the safeties and the secondaries, I think we'll just see them grow into themselves over the course of this season. So I'm not too alarmed about what I saw from the passing game, especially if you're able to generate 4 interceptions in one game, then you probably can afford to give up some dink and duck, 10, 15-yard catches every once and then.
Yeah, well, and it's the interesting case you make is that, like you said, you gave up a bunch of yards, but at the end you got an interception, so it's okay. And the thing about interceptions is that they're fluky. I mean, we watched the Vikings defense all last season and they couldn't stop anything, but they'd get one timely turnover and it takes away all of that. Now, you'll watch them this year and, maybe things end up worse for them because turns out turnovers are a fluky stat because they're not always dependent on, interceptions aren't always dependent on the corner making a great play. Sometimes it's just dependent on the quarterback making a bad throw or making a bad read or the wide receiver tips it up and you just happen to be lucky to get in it. That's not saying every interception is purely luck, but it's saying most interceptions and the process to get them are luck based because they're just out of a cornerback or a defensive back's control in that situation. So that's kind of the deal with interceptions. But so that's maybe the cause for concern. That's maybe a pause. But like you said, they were selling out for the run. They were up there. They were meeting that. And whether that's part of the game plan of like, we don't care if we give up passing yards, as long as they can't run the ball on us, we're going to be okay. Maybe that was part of the game plan for Bolte and company. But, at the end of the day, Bemidji State got the win. They only gave up 13 points. They got some interceptions, some things to clean up on. But, overall, we're just kind of nitpicking after that first week of the season. For all intensive purposes, everything went as well as it could have because in the new poll this week, Bemidji State stays at number 11. I know there were some polls that go 10 or 11, but from what I've seen, I think Bemidji State is firmly at the 11th best football team in Division II.
Yeah, I typically go off the AFCA coaches poll when I look at the polls for Division II.
American Football Coaches Association?
Yes,
Yeah.
that is exactly what that stands for. So, and they, like you said, they're staying at number 11 this week. And honestly, early in the season, a lot of these teams are probably going to stay pat where they are. And that's not a surprise to me. Once you get later into the season, that's when the real movement starts to take place. So we will see what happens going forward with the Beavers. And I guess before we jump into a quick preview of this next week's game, we should go around the NSIC, take a look at what some of the teams in the conference did besides the Beavers this week. There was a couple of non-conference games. Winona State losing to Saginaw Valley State 34-24. That was a little surprising to me, and maybe it's just my NSIC bias and knowing what Winona State did last year as very impressive. I'm unfamiliar with Saginaw Valley's game, so I apologize to them. Maybe they are just that good. We'll have to kind of monitor that going later into the season to see how bad or good of a loss that was for Winona. But a 10-point loss on the road in Michigan for Winona State. Probably the scariest opponent the Beavers will have this season. Minnesota State Mankato going into Sioux Falls, South Dakota, beating Sioux Falls 54-26. So Mankato looks very good very early in the season. Obviously, the Beavers beating up on Northern State. Southwest Minnesota State, who, spoiler alert, is the Bemidji State Beavers' second opponent, first away game this season. They barely squeaked out a win against Minot State, man. They were in Minot, North Dakota. Minot led for almost the entire game. I kid you not. And towards the end, I watched the last couple drives. Southwest took the lead on a touchdown drive late, probably with under 5 minutes to go. And then Minot ended up fumbling the ball, or turning it over on downs, and then the first play Southwest goes like 40 yards to the house on a run play. And so it ended up, Minot scored again late in that game, so it ended up 28-23 as the final score for Southwest, but they really did not look good against Minot. And as we know, it's hard to tell just how good Minot will be, especially after the way Wayne State kind of came out of nowhere last year. I don't want to judge them too early in the season, but historically, Minot's been one of the teams at the bottom of the NSIC North, so not a great look early in the season for Southwest. We'll see how they go next season. Minnesota Duluth beating the Tar out of Northern Michigan 47-10. That's a non-conference opponent as well. Wayne State 31, MSU Moorhead 23. So a one-score game there. Kind of, surprising. Moorhead keeping it within 8 points, I think, on a team that went to the playoffs last year. Concordia St. Paul 43 in St. Paul over Upper Iowa. Of course, that's a non-conference game again this year. And then on Saturday, the lone game was Augustana over UMary 38-7. So quick look at the standings. Obviously, you're not going to see much, but Bemidji State is one of 5 teams that are 1-0 in NSIC play. So another one of those teams is their week 2 opponent. That is Southwest Minnesota State. And I guess looking at that game, I kind of expect another pretty easy one. Obviously, you don't want to sleep on anybody, especially this early in the season. You don't know what's going on. Maybe Southwest is actually really not that bad, and they just had, again, kind of the week 1 stutters that Bemidji State had last year. But going down to Marshall, I expect a little bit more of the same. Maybe not 49 points, but again, I expect a game that's pretty comfortable for the Beavers. And by halftime, I expect you to kind of know, all right, as long as we don't turn the ball over, we'll probably be okay.
Yeah, I mean, Southwest Minnesota State is a team that Bemidji State should walk in and beat. They're the better team. Bemidji State laid the wood on them last year. Now having to go down to Marshall, that'll be the interesting wrinkle in the situation. But overall, I think this should be a game that Bemidji State should go in and win. And again, they're going to win it because of they're going to pass the ball a lot. They're going to do a lot of things with the wide receiving core they have and with Brandon Alt at quarterback. The one thing I'm going to be paying attention for in this week, Ian, is going to be that pass defense. Was what we saw kind of just a victim of circumstance in terms of game planning, or should we be concerned about that back end unit? And basically, I'm just kind of going to watch for the passing game of Southwest Minnesota State. We'll see how they do, and we'll see how the Beaver defense responds. We'll see if they get some more timely turnovers or if they just overall do a better job in coverage. We'll kind of figure it out as the game goes on. But I think that's the one thing I'm looking for in this game is how is that pass defense for Bemidji State going to hold up? And, will I finally be right on my claim that Brandon Alt will throw for 300 yards and 4 touchdowns?
Yeah, that might be a tough one again, just because we don't know how this game is going to go. And if it is kind of over early, that's a tough look for your prediction. But Southwest Minnesota State currently 5th in the conference in terms of pass yards per game at 225, which is not necessarily a big number of pass yards per game. But when you consider all the elements that might go into games, it's a 1 game sample size so far. So can't tell too much from it, but definitely something to watch for is that pass defense. And let's see how their pass defense, they were 9th. But again, like you look at these stats and how much is Minot State throwing the ball? They allowed 185 pass yards last week to Minot State. Well, when you consider that Minot State's not necessarily the best offense in the conference, maybe that's not quite a good, number. But again, we really just don't know that much. I think it takes like 2 to 3 weeks to really get a good grasp on how good teams are going to be this year and how good their defensive unit's going to be running, run defense, pass defense. You got to get a little bit of a variation in there because, you can say we have the best pass defense in the country after week 1. But if your opponent was Army, then nobody's really going to care that you have a great pass defense statistically. Yeah. So it's all up in the air. But I think we, again, can expect a pretty comfortable game for Bemidji State. So with that being said, do you want to do some predictions, CJ?
Yeah, let's do some predictions for the football team. So let's do score and let's do bold prediction. I've already got my bold prediction in for the game. Brandon Alt will throw for 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. Is it a bold prediction if I do it 2 weeks in a row? I don't really care.
You're just going to keep nailing that one home. It's going to happen at some point this year, damn it. And when it does, CJ's going to be right.
It's like what we talked about, with the running backs or a quarterback. If you give them enough opportunities, eventually they'll throw an interception or fumble. If you give me enough opportunities, eventually I will stumble upon success. So I'm going to think Bemidji State wins this game. Let's say 36-20.
36-20. I think that's a fair score. I'm going to say Bemidji State's going to win this game 40-21, I think is what I would go with. A little bit more on offense, and I think that Southwest is going to pick up their scoring a little bit later in the game when Bemidji's already kind of got the game in hand. And my bold prediction is that Ali Muhammad is once again, maybe it's not super bold because he's already 1 for 1 on this, but he's going to continue his success. He's going to have over 125 yards on the ground, and he's going to pick up at least 1 score. And I think BSU is going to run for about 200 yards, if not a little bit more in this game. I would say 200 is the bare minimum. I think that rushing attack is really going to announce itself this week as something that can stay as kind of a staying power for BSU's offense.
I like how you hedged when you said he'll get at least 1 score as your way of saying, like, I said a score. I didn't say it was a rushing touchdown. I didn't say if he was receiving. Didn't say if it was returning. I don't think he returns, but
I kind of did that unintentionally, but now that you mention it, I think I am going to leave it. He doesn't seem like he's necessarily the receiving back for BSU. That seems to be more of Sage Booker's route. And honestly, BSU, they don't use running backs that much in the passing game. They're more of pass blockers than they are receivers. I think there's so
many.
When you
have 5 out like that, you're just like, you only have a limited number of offensive linemen. So that running back has to be in there.
I was looking over the roster this last weekend, and I think we have like 8 tight ends on our roster. And I'm like, man,
they're tight end / fullbacks.
Well, yeah, but even then, like, how often do we use either of those positions? Why do we have 8 of these guys? Maybe I'm completely like off base. Maybe it's more of that, when McGath comes in for those like QB runs, maybe they just end up putting 4 of those guys on the field with them or something like that.
They got a special formation for like some power, certain goal lines.
Right.
Maybe like special teams, they're probably used a whole lot, like on punt and punt block and stuff like that. That definitely is probably their bread and butter. But yeah, I know it's crazy that they have 8 of them, and it feels like it's not like, it's a weird spot, It's the picture of like all those army guys and the one guy's in like a sailor uniform or something like that.
Yeah.
You just stick out of place.
Yeah. It was just shocking to me because I felt like you don't see him that much on offense, probably special teams and short yardage stuff. But yeah, I think it'll be a good game for the Beavers. I'm really excited this weekend to get an opportunity. I won't be able to watch the football game. Of course, it's at 5 p.m. on Saturday. Most of our games are usually at noon or 2 or 1. Every other game this season, besides the Thursday night one, is at noon,
Gotta
2 or
play it
1. And
under
I
the
will be
lights.
going to the Gophers game this weekend. We bought tickets like 2 months ago, and I'm like, oh, what time is the Beavers game in? Oh, 5. Perfect, because ours is
Perfect.
at 6:30. So I might try to track it from my phone a little bit, but probably won't be able to catch too much of that. So hopefully BSU just puts it in the bag pretty early.
So I'll be able to watch the game. So I'll be able to do our post-game minutes, which Ian did his post-game thoughts after the game. You can go check that out on our Facebook page, on our Twitter page. Just follow Beaver Banter and you're able to find that. And plenty more content coming for our podcast and for that other social media stuff. So be sure to follow on those pages as well. Ian, anything else you want to say about BSU athletics before we call this episode done?
No, I think we've seen a pretty good start to the fall so far, and hopefully more of the same coming this next weekend. We'll see if women's soccer can score some more goals. We'll see if football can keep scoring all the points that they've been doing. Maybe that's what's going on. Football's just taking all of the scoring from the soccer team.
Too much of that offensive energy at Chet Anderson Stadium is just getting kind of put in the direction of Bemidji State football offense. And I think we got to do some kind of ritual on the field. I don't know if a Beaver needs to be involved. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what that process looks like. Maybe let's give it another week or two before we get the book out. But it's not in the right direction. Let's just say to start out the season. So this has been the Beaver Banter Podcast. That's Ian Rivers. I'm CJ Baumgartner. Again, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, follow us on YouTube as well. That's where you can watch all of these podcasts on video form if you want to see our faces. You can also listen on audio on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts as well. We'll be back to record